Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Mark Roberti, and this is the podcast for entrepreneurs who are looking for the breakthrough for their businesses. As we continue to do more of our work as entrepreneurs, we can find ourselves doing the same type of work over and over again. And in order to break out of that cycle and get better results, we need to think on a more creative scale. We need to unleash the entrepreneurial creativity inside of us. And that is going to be the focus of this episode. Today's guest is the host of the Boss Girl Creative Podcast. Its focus is on teaching the whys, hows, and whats of blogging, business, and being a creative entrepreneur. Listeners can learn anything from getting out of a creative rut, growing a community around your brand, launching a product or service, and social media insights as well. Today's guest for episode 138 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than Taylor Bradford. Taylor, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Taylor, it is great to have you on the show, and creativity is very important for entrepreneurs because that allows us to approach problems differently, find new solutions. But before we get into that piece of our conversation, I'd love to get some background. So why did you start the Boss Girl Creative Podcast?
It was actually an extension from a series that I had been running on my life-inspired blog at the time. So I started blogging in 2008 and then kind of full-time blogging in 2011 and discovered how much I enjoyed the nitty-gritty of blogging and teaching how to blog and how to use social media. And so I created a series called #BloggingEducation and wrote over 40 lessons in the series and decided once I heard my first podcast in the fall of 2014 that it would be a great extension of that. And so I launched my show in July 2015 and have been producing a show every Wednesday since then.
Taylor, thank you for that backstory. And I mean, podcasting has definitely been a lot of fun for me as well. And one of the things that I'm wondering about creativity is there a way to just call upon your creative abilities and tap into it at any moment? Or do you feel like it's something that comes up on the fly? But how do you suggest we tap into that creativity if it's something we could tap into at any moment?
I think it kind of depends on the situation. There's a lot of times where just the ideas are just free flowing and I will just start writing them down, almost kind of like brain dump style. I will get a large white sheet of paper and roll it down the back of a closet door and take Post-it notes. And as I feel like all this creativity coming, I'll just start jotting down notes and then slapping them up on this white sheet of paper. So then I can go back and organize once I kind of run out of those ideas. The other process for me is just seeing something somewhere that sparks a creative idea. And those are very unexpected and I have no way to control when they actually happen. So I do think it's situational as to like how inspired you can be to be creative.
And I definitely see the creativity coming during unexpected moments. You have that classic idea of someone thinking of the big idea while in the shower and not being able to write it down. And I'm wondering if there are ways to get better at harnessing this creativity unexpected, like anything of that nature, or is it just something that you have to have already?
No, I don't think you have to have it already. And I do, having those moments where you're like, oh, this is the most inconvenient time for me to be like having these ideas. I have no way to focus them down into something. And I do think that sometimes we have to actually kind of schedule in these times, even though that sounds really forced. But like if you can say, okay, once a week or once a month, I'm gonna schedule out this time for however many minutes, and I'm just gonna sit there and I'm gonna just start looking on Pinterest, or I'm going to start, taking a peek at at what others are doing and seeing if anything is sparking creativity. Because I think once you kind of unravel the knot, then it can kind of spiral from there if you allow yourself kind of time to do that. And I do think with the kind of the invention of, all of the voice to service kind of functionalities like Alexa and Google Home, that if you have close proximity, you can, if you're in the shower, for example, you could say, "Hey, Alexa, take a note," and then you're not stuck in that moment. I think technology is moving in that way that we can be wherever and have the capability of utilizing technology to our benefit when those kind of creative sparks happen.
And it's interesting how you mentioned using voice recognition option like Alexa to write those notes for you, and just putting the idea into a place where you can see it without having to think about it over and over again. And when we think about these creative ideas, I mean, a big part of it is going outside of the box. And some of these creative ideas we think of could seem like they're really far out there. I mean, like, the idea of doing a daily podcast, like when John Lee Dumas was like the first person to do it, like there was no model to go by. He just did it. So how can we maintain our creativity and do things we're going to do, but without worrying about what others may think about our concepts?
Honestly, I think you just kind of have to put your blinders on and just do it, and just like do you and do you well. I see that a lot in the blogger space, and it's kind of like either the imposter syndrome or comparison syndrome, and nobody can go anywhere having those internal battles with themselves. Like, I'm not producing enough like so-and-so, or so-and-so is totally killing it right now because they've created such and such. I think we limit ourselves in our ideas and our, like, how we put things forward in our businesses by basically just like having the imposter syndrome and the comparison syndrome. And if we can just harness that internally and put on the blinders, I always talk about, like, when you see the horse races and the horses have those eye masks on, those eye masks actually prevent them from seeing their competition coming up beside them. So it keeps their eyes focused forward. And I think that's what we have to do in business, is when you have that idea, if it's a feasible idea, no matter how big or how small it is, I think it behooves us to actually look at the steps to bring it to fruition and what it actually means to bring it to fruition, and forget about what everyone else is doing. Because if we're too influenced by what everyone else is doing, we may not bring that amazing idea to the table and watch it actually blossom.
That is an interesting point you bring up. I mean, the blinders is a very interesting approach. Like, you just have to commit to it regardless of what people are going to say, but you also don't want to be a Me Too type of a person, which is something that I got, especially towards the end, because influencers, like, well, maybe you'll see like a lot of people saying like, this is how you dominate Facebook ads, or like, it seems to be like this similar approach that almost everyone seems to take. And if you could add some creativity to that, you could stand out and have your differentiator in play. But when it comes to creative ideas, like, there's still a lot of other things we're doing in the background. Like, entrepreneurs are usually busy for, like, some of them could be busy for the entire day. So how do we find the time to pursue our creative projects in addition to doing everything else that we're supposed to do?
I think that sometimes that's where a team comes in, because your bandwidth for functioning in your business is only so much. And at some point, something has to give. And sometimes I feel like when we do switch over to kind of exploring these new ideas that we have, that something gets put on the back burner. And we don't intend for that to happen, but it just happens because we only have so much bandwidth. So I think that how we kind of like combat that is having a team, and whether that's a part-time team or a once a week team person, I think it it is something that we have to bring to the table. Is we can't do this all by ourselves. Yes, we can call ourselves solopreneurs, but solopreneurs who are doing everything all the time, I mean, they're basically doing the jobs of 10 people, and you can only sustain that for so long. And so if you want to keep moving forward and you want to grow your business, at some point you have to bring at least one person on to help you. And whether or not that you outsource that to someone virtually, or you bring someone on in person and they come to wherever you're located, or you have weekly meetings or whatever, taking some of those tasks that you absolutely do not like doing that are preventing you from actually working on the things that you know will take you forward, that's what you have to do. And there's no working around that. Otherwise, parts of your business will fail, and not fail meaning you won't be able to just come out of that hole, but fail meaning like maybe your social media doesn't get scheduled for 2 weeks, or maybe you don't get a blog post out and you were supposed to, or maybe you've totally forgot to write the newsletter that you write every single week. So there's a lot of give and take. And at some point you have to decide, okay, I can't do it all. I need help, because if I want to keep moving forward, I have to say, okay, I can't do this. So I'm going to delegate this task, and this task to so-and-so who I know loves to do that. That way it will allow me to keep creating and giving myself space to do that.
And the team is something very important. I mean, there are a lot of things that I would not be able to do. Like this podcast, if I didn't have my team, it would not be what it is now. It may even just be an idea. So having that team is very important. But I remember when I was a solopreneur, making that jump from no one on your team to one person on your team, that's a big step. It gets easier as you add more people to your team and you go through more experiences like that. But what's your advice for the solopreneur who wants to make that jump?
I think the biggest thing is to start tracking your time on specific tasks to see like where you can gain time to do other things, and kind of rate the tasks that you do every day for your business. Like just kind of track what it is that you do from 8 to 9. What is it that you do from 9 to 10? What is it that you do? And just kind of like give yourself a snapshot of your day, and then looking at those tasks. Okay, I'm spending this much time on Facebook, and I'm spending this much time writing my email newsletter, and I'm spending this much time recording a podcast. Like looking at what it is that you're spending time on and kind of classifying what you could actually delegate out, and then going on the search for someone that can do those things. I truly think that's how you can bring on that first person, is you just have to figure out, okay, this is important. I don't want to give this up yet, so I'm going to keep doing it, but I totally feel comfortable giving the reins over on this, and this, and then go find someone who's really amazing at that and hire them.
The moment you give those reins over and you're starting to build a team, that's going to obviously give you a lot more time and help you on that journey towards reaching your full potential. But there are some people who feel like they're held back on that journey to reaching their full potential. They have this goal in mind, but for some reason things haven't been working out and they haven't accomplished this goal yet. So Taylor, I'm wondering what you believe holds most people back from reaching their full potential.
I honestly think just like that's an internal battle. I think we hold our own selves back. I don't think it's because we're not smart enough. I don't think it's because we don't have the ideas. I think it's pure fear of failure for a lot of people, and taking that risk, because it's a big risk to take that leap of faith into the unknown. I mean, we're not there yet, so how do we know how it's going to be? But I think also if you can like look at where it is that you want to be and set up your processes as if you are already there, and get that in place so that when you do get there, you're already set. There's nothing that you have to do. You just keep moving forward. So I do think a lot of it is fear. A lot of it is the fear of failure and taking that risk, because we don't know what it's going to be like. And I think if we can just like somehow move past that, that's going to help us forward. And I think part of moving past that is getting processes set up in place so that we are acting as if we are already there.
And it's interesting how you mentioned getting processes in place because business, so there's like so many different moving parts. And if you do set up those processes, it definitely does become much easier. But you also mentioned that internal battle, which is something that influences who we become when certain challenges come our way. And that internal dialogue can really make or break us. So with challenges in mind, Taylor, I'm wondering if you could share with us one big challenge that you faced in your journey and a powerful lesson you learned during that challenge.
Probably the biggest challenge for me, and this is actually in a completely different business that I function in, is actually scalability. So I also have a vintage rental business, and it is more of a service-based, in-person kind of business versus just running everything online. And trying to figure out, like, how do I scale this? Like, I feel like I'm like confined into this box, and I don't really know what the next step is. But then I started reaching out to those that have already gotten to where I want to be. And I started asking them questions. What was your journey like? What did you do at this point in your business? What was your first investment? What was your first team member to bring on? And kind of like looking at their roadmaps and figuring out, okay, that roadmap I can totally see myself taking. So this is the next step. This is what I'm going to put into place. I'm not there yet, but I'm going to put it into place because that's where I want to be. And that's why I just mentioned like setting up those processes as if you're already there. That's a big, I just learned that. I was just at a retreat a couple weeks ago, and that was like an eye-opening moment for me, was like, wow, okay, I'm totally a solopreneur in this business right now, but I know I'm going to have a team if I'm going to grow, but I'm not ready for that team, but I need things in place as if I already have that team. And that was a huge learning curve for me that I just experienced. And I'm like, wow, okay, now the fog is kind of cleared. I now see the next steps that I'm supposed to take in this journey.
Taylor, thank you for giving us a glimpse into that mindset because, I mean, those processes, again, it's so important to set those up because, I mean, they just make it easier for you to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And if you put too much on your plate that you're not delegating properly, that will hurt your ability to think creatively and also take action on those creative ideas. And you mentioned before you were at a retreat, and I feel like something really important is self-education, which is something that I try to provide my listeners each time they listen to a Breakthrough Success episode. But to continue our self-education further, I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 great books that you believe would have a big impact on us.
I would be actually the worst person to ask about those kinds of things. I don't read nonfiction. Is that crazy? I do all of my learning online. And so where I'm looking at resources, so for example, I invested in B School a few years ago, and it completely changed my world. I have a business minor, so that's not what I was signing up for to learn. I was signing up to help me walk through a new idea that I had, which actually turned out to be the podcast, and had 8 weeks of solid focus on making this idea be something. And so B School would be one thing that I would recommend. The second thing that I would recommend is learning how to properly launch a product or a service. As a blogger, when we create things, all we do is ask our friends if it sounds like a cool idea. And if they say yes, then we create it and we hit publish and hope that it goes well. There was no formula for creating something. We would just do it and then hope that somebody saw it somewhere. And so I learned after hearing about a program called Fearless Launching that there was actually a roadmap that you should take to help you launch something successfully. And so now knowing that there's a process behind launching a product or a service, I had no clue about that before I learned about fearless launching. So fearless launching would be the second thing that I would recommend. And then the third thing that I would recommend is never be scared to reach out to somebody in the industry that you are in and ask questions. Because if you are watching somebody doing what you want to do, they got there somehow. And while some may say no, they're not willing to share their secrets, there are those out there that are willing. And don't take no for an answer. Just find somebody else, because they will be willing to answer your questions. Even if it's in a consulting role, there are people out there that will answer your questions. So do not be scared to ask people questions.
Taylor, thank you for those great recommendations. And I love this side of the conversation because normally I get 3 book recommendations. They're really great. I've bought a lot of books based on guest recommendations, but you mentioned you were able to have that focus during 8 weeks to go through the first training course that you recommended. And I feel like 8 weeks is a lot of time to commit, which is the length of a lot of training courses. It's usually anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks. And in some cases, you have people paying like $1,000 or $2,000, even more than that for a training course, but then barely going through it. So how do you have that focus to go through a whole training course that you get that whole 8-week program and still do everything else you're supposed to do?
Obviously, I think it's something that you're just going to have to schedule for. I was not perfect during those 8 weeks, but what it opened me up to was networking and getting people in my world that I never would have had in my world had I not signed up to go through the program, who helped me lay a foundation for what later became the launch of my show and my community. And without having access to those people, I would never have moved forward in the way that I did. So I was there to hash out this idea. That's why I signed up. I was ready for that next level. And that next level, even though I didn't complete, quote unquote, the entire course, I still have access to that course every single year that it starts over again. And so I utilize that as, okay, time to get focused. This is the idea that you want to work through for 2018 or 2019 or whatever year it is. And it kind of gives me okay, this is your game plan. You know, this course comes back around every single year. This is the time. It's a slow season for you. This is a time for you to buckle down and actually start exploring that idea you've been waiting 6 months to explore on. So I utilize that course still to this day as kind of a launch pad for what it is that I want to explore, because it is in a slow season for me, and it allows me to actually focus on that versus when I'm in a busy time and have basically no bandwidth to learn anything else.
All right, this will most likely be the last question about training courses, but I see some people in the space, like they say, well, I could just get the book of the training course, or I could just buy books on a similar topic, which would be a lot less expensive. So I'm wondering what your thoughts on why you do training courses instead of books.
I think the connection and the networking is where you benefit from versus a book. And I have nothing against books or workbooks or courses that are self-taught or self-led. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think there is it speaks volumes if you can do things with other people that are in the trenches with you, and you can collaborate and you can communicate and you can hash out ideas, or when you get stuck, there's people there that will help you get unstuck, and you cannot get that from a book. And so I think there is power in actually joining something where a lot of people are doing the exact same thing. They may have different ideas from you, but being able to hash out your idea and get feedback immediately from people is so incredibly powerful.
I really love the idea of having the networking. That is something that a lot of training courses do with a private Facebook group or something of that nature. So that's definitely something to consider if you're deciding between focusing on training courses or books. You can even do a mix of both, but in the end, it's important to pick the form of self-education that works best for you. And before we wrap up this episode, I would like to flip the tables a little bit. So Taylor, I've asked you several questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
What is our why? Why are we even in business? Why are we doing what we think we should be doing? Because I think if we don't know what our why is, we're never going to be successful. And so really honing in on like, what are your core values? What is your brand's culture supposed to be? What do you want it to be? And then ultimately, what is your why? Because if you don't know what your why is, you're never going to be able to take it to a level that is going to kind of become the definition of success for you, whatever that might mean. So focus in on what is your why? Why are you doing this? And if you can find that out, then it's going to be gravy from there on out.
Taylor, thank you for sharing that great question and for sharing all of your great insights throughout our time together. And Breakthrough Success listeners, if you want to learn more about Taylor, head over to bossgirlcreative.com. You'll be able to access a lot of her content on her site, and she also has a course, Unlocking Your SEO Potential. It's geared at bloggers, but it's going to benefit you big time if you are looking for some SEO help. That course link will be in the show notes at marketberry.com/E138. Taylor, thank you for taking the time to share all of your great insights with us. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit markberry.com/